What is the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to you? I woke up in a metal box with people banging on it. I had no idea where I was, only that I couldn't move and I hurt all over. You know that cliché that even my hair hurt? Yeah, it's true. Even my hair hurt. I was positive I had died, and for some reason people were banging on my coffin before they lowered me into the ground. Except, I wasn't dead. I was alive and I wanted out the coffin and back among the living. But I couldn't make a single noise to let anyone know. A loud voice from nowhere said, "Please lie still." That probably made my terror worse, not better. It turns out I had been in a very bad car accident and the coffin was a closed MRI. 3 years ago I watched my best and only friend blow her brains out. The worst of it wasn't having bits of brain matter on my face or the ringing in my ears from the gunshot in a small room. It was how unaffected I seemed to be. I was catatonic for a week and I didn't really snap until it was just me and a freshly dug grave alone in a cemetery. I'm halfway through university now and I still don't know how to interact with people. When I woke up and looked out of my bedroom window to see a masked figure holding a knife in my backyard. They were motionless, staring directly at me. I shouted. It turned out my, then, girlfriend and her housemate were pulling a hilarious prank. I actually saw the funny side when I calmed down, but I was initially so scared I nearly started crying. I was staying with my brother 6 years ago. Sometime after 1 a.m. I began hearing something hitting the side of the house. Right next to the bedroom window I was sitting near, to be exact. I went out to the dark and dining room to look out the windows there. I'm on my hands and knees and slowly pull the curtain aside about an inch and look out. I actually thought I wouldn't see anyone. But I did, and they saw me. A masked man suddenly popped his head up into view. I made a strangled-like squeal, crawled under the table into my brother's room. I had never crawled so fast in my life. I woke up my brother and hysterically told him what I had just seen, all while crying and shaking. He went out and searched, but didn't see anyone. Turns out it was one of my brother's friend. He was throwing water balloons at what he thought was my brother's room. His plan was to get my brother to come outside and then throw water balloons at him. I guess he didn't do it because of how freaked out I was. I was shot in the face with .380 hollow point bullet when I drunkenly knocked on the wrong apartment door. I had only lived in the apartment for a couple months, all the buildings looked the same and the door I knocked on had the same number as mine on it. It probably didn't help that the guy who shot me was a drug dealer and had 13 pounds of marijuana in his apartment. I was in the hospital for 3 days. I got stitched up and had to have follow-up surgery to remove bullet fragments that were lodged in my left eye. This was 7 years ago and he was sentenced to a minimum of 62 years. I was sitting at my computer browsing the internets, down in the nicely finished basement in my nice empty house in Colorado, and I heard a voice say, as clearly as if there were a person standing directly behind me, "You're an embarrassment to your family. You should just kill yourself." So, yeah. It turns out psychiatric medications have really weird side effects in a very small proportion of users. I would have to say the scariest moment of my life would have to be when my brother had a seizure right next to me in a car. He has cancer but never had a seizure before. Everything was fine, we were on our way home and my father was driving and out of nowhere my brother screamed, "Slow down." Right before convulsing and tensing up for a horrifying 30 seconds, then he passed out and I honestly thought he had died. All I kept doing as my dad sped and drove through red lights and past cars was keep my hand on his head and trying to talk to him. We'll never forget that. It goes to show that some of the scariest shit you will ever go through in your life might not even involve your own safety but those you love. One time I was at BMT not too long ago. The military would give you a crapload of shots and we had this one kid who was really scared of needles. There were incidents where he would pass out when they drew blood samples from him and it would take forever. So on the second or third week of training, we head to the clinic for a flight physical. Again, we got our blood drawn and this kid and myself were the first one in. So they stick the needle into my arm and start drawing blood. I was perfectly fine. To my left, only 3 feet apart, was that kid. The doctor was getting annoyed because he could see this kid tense up as soon as he grabbed his arm. This kid was flipping out. So the doctor says, "Could you stop? For like 5 seconds, could you calm down?" "I'm sorry sir, I just can't." I don't blame him. So anyways, the second the doctor finally sticks the needle inside the kid, his leg kicks out, and he starts having a seizure. This kid was 3 feet away from me, going through the exact same process, and there he is, twitching like crazy. I was freaking the hell out, thinking holy fucking shit. Being stopped and asked to get off a passenger bus at 3 a.m. by some sketchy military police in the outskirts of a narco-controlled town in Mexico, they eventually let us go on. Probably watching my brother beating our mother unconscious in self-defense. I was 8 years old and he was 16 years old. She was in the middle of a drunken rage and had beat him and shoved him really hard against the wall. She had beat me a couple of times before, but he had to deal with it way more often. That particular time he just couldn't take it, so I saw him push her down on the floor and beat her repeatedly. I was watching from the living room doorway, then I saw him cry and scream hysterically when he was done, and Mom was just laying there completely still. I cried as well and was panicked. I remember I felt more sorry for my mom than for my brother back then. When he slammed his door shut, I ran to her and cried for her to wake up, but in retrospect I feel sorry for everyone. My mom has a disease and we are two kids who had to deal with it every day. Waking up to a very large man, shrieking and hovering over my bed, in his underwear. When I was 6, I used to live near a house for people who were mentally unstable. People that were generally non-violent and could take care of themselves to a certain extent but needed to be medicated or supervised. It was privately owned and isn't there anymore, so I'm unsure of what they actually handled. Anyway, this guy had managed to get out of his room, the front door, and the gate surrounding the property and had wandered into our house. My mom and I were the only ones home, and I don't know if they even knew how long he'd been in our house. He hadn't broken in, so he would have had to come in earlier in the day when we were outside since the doors were locked at night. He'd had enough time to strip down to his briefs, at least. My mom thinks he came in through the basement and hid out in the laundry room because he was covered in laundry detergent. But yeah. Middle of the night, he stumbled into my room, maybe thinking it was his, and absolutely lost it on me for occupying his bed. My mom came running in with a gun, got me away from him, and called the cops. He just sort of hung out in my room until they showed up. He had rearranged my toys and stripped everything off my bed. Edit, it was called Sipes Grove, in NC, according to my uncle. He said it was a group home for men with schizophrenia that had been in private care before schizophrenia was a known thing, apparently. I can't find any information about it online though. I know the security fence surrounding it was ripped out in 2001, but I'm not sure when it shut down or where the residents went. Getting a phone call from the calmest, most cool under pressure person I've ever known, a person I'd only ever seen cry one time in my whole life, my mom, panicking. 1,000 words spewed at me in a 60 seconds phone call. I was only able to pick out certain phrases through the panic and crying. Youngest sister's name, ambulance, a cliff, 3 hours, driving. I don't know where I am. Hospital, another phone call. Your dad. I have to go. Click end of phone call. I was 3 hours away from home. My youngest sister may have been dead from a car accident, and my mother was driving a car in the city she didn't know while panicking. My dad's a truck driver and was in Delaware, and my other sisters were 2 hours from home, 1.5 hours from home without a car, and a 12-hour train ride from home. Turns out her car went off the road, down a ravine, and into a tree less than a mile from home on her way to a 4-hour class. She spent the greater part of 3 hours unconscious and alone in the freezing cold. Woke up on her own, thank God, and climbed out to the nearest house. She didn't, and still doesn't, remember anything at all from before the accident, didn't know her name, where she lived, who her family was. Zero memories. She's alive though and living very happily. Still terrifying to recall. At first I read the word terrifying as satisfying and was going to answer the birth of my son, but then I realized my error, and also realized that my answer is still appropriate. A few months ago, I woke up in the hospital with some people I had never met before in my life. All of this while I was freaking about how I was going to deal with the fact that I lost my arm in the crash. My girlfriend was pregnant and they hadn't found the ring in the car or on my person, and the nurses kept insisting that I was in there for heart surgery. Within a few minutes I started remembering how I wasn't in a car crash, I didn't have a girlfriend I knocked up, I hadn't lost my arm, thank God, and I was actually there for heart surgery. Within the day, I remembered my actual life instead of the completely normal one my brain cooked up. I just had to think about this, and realized it was when I was worried my brother had committed suicide. My brother was suicidal and basically on suicide watch at home, and I was at uni in a different city but used to stay up into the early hours of the night talking to him online cause I knew he felt worse late at night. One night he had said some passing and fairly innocuous comments that still concerned me. I was on high alert mentally, and then BRB. But he didn't come back. After about 20 minutes, I think, I was freaking out and called my mom at 3 a.m. and told her to go and check on him. It took her a few minutes to phone back, and in those moments I really thought he had done it. Mom sent my dad up to check on him cause she was too scared. He had just fallen asleep. Man, I hadn't thought about that for years, and felt physically sick remembering it. So glad my baby bro was okay. Wanna go wake him up and give him a hug but will refrain. Stalked by a mountain lion while hiking at night. I kept my shit together only because my soul was going into pray mode. 3 separate times over an hour it made an appearance. The third time I ran at it, headlamp on, knife in mouth, bear mace in right hand, white gas torch full blast in left hand. Didn't see it again. Okay, so my family had 2 houses for a long time due to my father's job, and one of our houses we only visited during holidays and summers. The house was pretty dark and oddly shaped, made by this eccentric architect. So anyway, one summer we drove the 6 hours to this house, and the first thing when we get out of our car one of our neighbors comes up and asks if we let someone stay in our house. We say no. She says she's seen someone walking around in the halls upstairs through the windows. Now, we do have an alarm set up throughout the house, and it never went off. Nonetheless, my dad went through the house first, and found no one. Everything was where we'd left it, so we've had quite a lot of scary instances in this house, but one I will never forget is this time I was helping my mom get my 2 little brothers ready to have dinner at a relative's house. I was around 14 or 15 at the time, and my brothers were around 1 and 2. While my mom is putting shoes on the 1-year-old, the 2-year-old suddenly jerks and looks up the stairs, and then goes running up them as fast as he can. My mom was obviously annoyed at this, and told me to go get him. So I walk up the stairs and look through the rooms one by one, finally finding him in my room. He was sitting on the floor by my mattress, looking dazed and confused. I walked over and picked him up. "Where'd that guy go?" he asked. I wasn't really paying attention so it didn't really register what he was saying. I idly asked what guy? And continued walking down the hall. Suddenly my brother gasps and points down the hall, exclaiming that guy. By then it hit me what he was implying, and I got chills and freaked out. I held on to him and ran down the stairs as fast as I could. Like I said, there were a lot of creepy instances in that house, but that's one I'll never forget. When I was around 12 I was on holiday with my family and we had stopped in a cafe for a break from walking around all day. I went to the toilets they had in the back. They weren't just cubicles, they were small rooms with proper solid doors. So did my business, and when I went to flush, the room went pitch black. Then I started seeing bright flashes along with extremely loud thunder. If I hadn't just gone I probably would have shit myself. I scrambled to unlock the door and went back to my family. They saw me and said I looked white as a sheet. My blood had completely drained from my face. I was terrified at what had just happened. Turned out it was all deliberate special effects set to go off every time someone flushed the toilet. My dad went to have a look and even though he was fully expecting it he nearly pissed himself. When I was 20, I had just transferred to Purdue University. I wasn't in the best of shape or the worst. One night, I started wheezing and having trouble breathing. I couldn't think straight and the room started spinning. I called 911. About 2 minutes after the paramedics arrived, I tried walking towards the front door when I collapsed face first onto the floor. When I came to, I couldn't move and I couldn't speak. All I remembered before coming to was lonely darkness. An absolute nothingness that seemed like I was floating in deep space without any light or sound or feeling. It turns out that after I collapsed, I had respiratory and cardiac arrest. I had died. The doctor said I was legally dead for about 2 minutes. When I awoke, I was in the hospital in a medically induced coma. The doctors never knew exactly what caused my respiratory and cardiac arrest. Between the ages of 5 to 16, watching my dad beat my mom and watching my mom slowing going into depression. Oh, this one time I watched my mom wanting and nearly killing herself and my shit excuse of a dad be an alcoholic all my life. 3:30 in the morning, been building fire line since 1 in the afternoon. Finally tied the line into the trail, getting ready to burn it off. Fire is backing downhill, about 100 yards up. I'm holding the second to last position on the line. Squad boss is walking down the line with a fusee, spotlighting. As the backfire starts to burn off the trail, is rapidly meeting the main backing fire. It starts to eddy. I stare at it in an exhausted haze. Wow, it really swirling around up there, I thought. Man, is getting stronger. That's kinda cool. Oh look, it coming right for me. Oh shit, a fire tornado is coming right for me. Coming right across the line. Everyone starts calling it in over the radio, and the whole crew starts beating a retreat back up the trail to the black. I take a look back and the fire whirl has made a 90-degree turn and is chasing us. We start sprinting, guys are dropping their packs to run faster. Fastest I've ever run. We make it to the black, crying and gagging on smoke, sucking air. The fire whirl tears past us at about 15 miles an hour, and proceeds to blow out 3,000 plus acres in the next hour. We spent 13 more days fighting that fire. My house got broken into when I was home. I was at home with my sister, she was 11, I was 19, because it was a snow day and school was cancelled. Our doorbell rang a few times but we didn't bother answering it. Then there was a really loud noise so I went downstairs to investigate only to find our front door open and the door frame broken. I stuck my head outside and saw a guy in a hoodie just standing there. I ran back upstairs, yelling at my sister to call the police. We hid in the bathroom while we waited for the police to come, which took a really long time because the roads were bad. Turns out the hoodie guy ran away after seeing me/hearing me yell at my sister to call the cops. But man, that moment I was face to face with the guy. Terrifying, had no idea if he was going to follow me back into the house and hurt us. Was driving to work in a heavy rainstorm on I-295 northbound in NJ. I drive a Ford SUV, not very big, 4-cylinder, so not very heavy either. I go around a bend, and the steering wheel kind of goes slack in my hand. I realize that out of my windshield I see the side of a tractor trailer 2 lanes over. I've hydroplaned completely sideways. I reverse my turn and take my foot off the accelerator. I got to work and immediately called my best friend to tell them how much I appreciate them, and my dad to tell him I desperately need new tires on my car. Less than a month ago on my birthday I was drinking with one of my buddies who I knew from work. I'd known him for a couple years and this wasn't the first time we'd hung out. We had been partying for many hours after the main party wore down and ended up on campus, we're both students, in one of the buildings. We'd been drinking there for a couple hours when he suddenly snapped. He punched me several times. He choked me until I blacked out at least 2 times. The most terrifying part for me was him choking me and asking me why I deserved to live. It was absolutely terrifying having to beg for my life when I thought he was going to choke me until he killed me. Even writing this is bringing back awful flashbacks. The worst part is having to go into work every week and see him. Thankfully we don't work closely and I can avoid him. Seeing an upside-down tree. I was a freshman in high school and crossing a busy road less than 1 block from the school. This was a major 4-lane thoroughfare through the city. I was crossing without the signal, but the turn light was on and when I started across no cars were coming. The lady who hit me came up over the hill and tried to beat the light. She slammed into my 220 pounds frame and threw me up in the air, which is where I saw the upside down tree. I saw the tree and literally thought that ain't right. Shit, I've been hit. Before I blacked out, I came to just as I rolled off the back of her car and hit the pavement. I literally saw stars like Wile E. Coyote and like him I sat up and shook my head to try and clear it. My father had a grand mal seizure due to a tumor about 6 years ago. The whole instance was such a blur because it happened so suddenly. I had just moved back in with my parents after 1 year of being in college and my relationship with my parents was somewhat rocky due to their controlling nature and my rebellious attitude. For some reason we had sat down together as a family for a late-night movie. We were all scrunched up next to one another just whimsically watching the movie and actually enjoying each other's company. It felt serene up until the point when my father stiffens up like a 2x4 and begins foaming at the mouth. I immediately hopped up from the couch and tried to bring him to the floor. He started gagging from the drool so I turned him on his side to let the drool out. I remember yelling at Mom to call 911 while laying by his side in what I thought were going to be his last moments. He survived the ordeal and later found put about the tumor. He had one more seizure a couple months after the first but it was very minor. 4 months after his first seizure he was operated on and the cancer was removed. He did chemo and other treatments for several months to come. He's alive and well and stronger than ever. I consider him my hero just for how incredibly tough that old bastard is. When I was 15 I was kidnapped by 2 men. I'm a female. I am now 70 and still have bad dreams and anxiety. It was the most terrifying thing to happen to me. I was shopping with my mother and while walking down a street 2 men came up behind us and they grabbed me by my arms and simply picked me up and ran with me down an alley. My mother ran after them screaming and beating on them to no avail. I was released several hours later unharmed. They were never caught. I was so traumatized that I couldn't remember what they looked like. 1. Flying through the air in a car and realizing that oh hey, the road immediately ahead curves away to the right, it's lined by giant redwoods, I'm doing 150 kilometers per hour, and none of my wheels are touching the ground. 2. Staring out a second-story window which looked out over a sheer drop to the ground, at midnight on Halloween, and seeing 2 glowing golden cat eyes floating just outside the window in the blackness, deciding that I was not going to listen to my now gibbering hindbrain, and instead I was going to go and open the second-story door onto the otherwise inaccessible balcony, about 5 feet away from the window, and then, with nothing between me and them, look back at whatever was making those eyes float there in the dark. 2a. Having those eyes track me as I walked across the room. 3. Being in a roller coaster which had vest-style restraints, the U-shaped ones you pull down over your head and they press against your chest, and was one of those upside-down ones where your feet dangle out over open air, meaning if the restraint wasn't locked you would fall out at speed and have a very bad time. Having the coaster chug up to the top of the first piece of track as the ground dropped away, literally, the boarding station was built on a hill, and the starting point of the track went up as the hillside went down. Not so bad, until we got to the top and started over the first giant plunge groundwards, when my body weight fell against the restraint, which happily went chank as it moved an inch forward before stopping. Sometimes when I'm surrounded in the dark I see flashes of color and things moving around if I stare too long. I don't know why and I figured it's because often I stay up way too late. However, one night I was with my brother and his friend who were crashing in my room. It's the biggest after all, and I sat there, slightly freaking out because I swore I could see something moving towards a glass. I told my brother and he just kinda shrugged it off until the glass, which was nowhere near the edge, just fall off and shattered against the floor. He thought I threw something at it to freak him out and told me to clean it up, which I did since I was far too freaked out to sleep that night. Thankfully, we moved from that location 2 months later for reasons unrelated to that event. Haven't seen weird stuff since that day but I still see flashes of color in the dark, although I assume there's a medical reason for that. I don't know if this was my most terrifying but it was just a few weeks ago so I'll post it. My roommate said I were burglarized, they took the TV, game consoles, iPads, etc. while we were all asleep in the home. That's not terrifying. The terrifying part is that my 4-year-old son was sleeping in his room, and he is a very light sleeper who will come see what movie we are watching late at night if he wakes up. Thankfully he did not wake up, but just the thought of what would have happened if he did wake up and walk out into the living room scares the hell out of me. I have a few. None of these are legitimately scary when looked back upon, but for me, they were horrific. When I was a wee baby, my family always went out to a shared cabin camping ground and there, I fought for toys amongst my small, bratty cousins and wandered around, as any healthy kid does. Me and my cousin, who I absolutely do not remember now, were wandering around while our parents sat around a huge bonfire and drank. It was pretty late out, and I was fairly happy running around the campground looking for frogs with her. I don't remember what led to it, but we saw an animal that we were both 100% was a big black bear. The bear proceeded to chase us. All I remember is the true terror I felt running away to the bonfire for my mother. I think my cousin fell while we were running, and since she was a toy-stealing BDCH I kept going on without her. Either that, or I was the one who fell, and that's why I remember being so scared. Pretty sure we reached our parents unharmed. I still have no clue if there was an actual bear, or if it was a dream memory, or if one of us kids freaked the other out and pretended there was a bear and then convinced ourselves there really was one. I just remember being scared for my life. In my later years, I'm pretty sure a ghost from the netherworld hated me and absolutely did not want me playing The Sims. I was in my mom's bedroom because that's where the computer was, and I was playing Sims. The wardrobe drawer flew open and I flipped my absolute shit because I was so scared. I flew out of the room and ran to my dad, who was in the kitchen on his laptop. I was probably crying hysterically, but I know it wasn't serious enough because I couldn't convince him to go into the bedroom to check it out. I know this because I threw an empty ice cream pail down the hallway because I was too scared to go back into the room. Pretty sure my dad told me it was just the cat. He did have a habit of sneaking into open drawers and sleeping in them, and we would often find him in there, whether or not they were open or closed. I still don't know what it was, though. We moved. I was home alone once, and just had gotten out of the shower. I heard the back door downstairs open, and since I remembered locking it, I assumed it was my sibling or my mother, but my mother was at work and my sibling was out. I froze, hanging over the banister after calling out my sister's name, because all I heard was shuffling and stamping. I went cold all over, and I'm not sure why, but I was absolutely convinced it was an intruder. I called out again, in the quiet house, very loudly, and very clearly, and got no response. The shuffling stopped and I thought, I am going to die today. I literally couldn't move, my mind was racing as I struggled to deal with this new, life-threatening situation. I think I went and got a random object from my room that was decent enough to bludgeon someone with and then went downstairs. I was sweating and shaking and I believe I started crying when I found my sister in the hallway taking off her boots. That's pretty much it in terms of false terror. The only fear I can remember that was legitimate was when I ran away from my house at 2 or 3 in the morning and hid in a nearby park and had a stranger approach me. To keep it short, I am pretty sure I was almost kidnapped, but my stepdad saved the day. When I was about 10 years old, my mother left me, my 2 younger sisters, and 2 very young cousins home alone. It was late at night, and there was a blasting snowstorm. The roads were completely impassable. They had the big plows working trying to clear the roads, but it was a total mess. We started getting phone calls. Vile, harassing, threatening phone calls. It seemed like dozens of them every time we hung up, it would ring again. That voice, as slick as cold black oil, slithering out of the phone saying he was going to do things to us. Dark things, horrifying things, things that I hadn't had names for before that day. My cousins and sisters were terrified. I was 10, and the oldest by far, and we were all alone and terrified. The only thing I could think of was to leave, and to go to my aunt's house. So, we bundled everyone up, and started to make our way. Most of the roads weren't plowed, but there were big plows and excavators working on the main roads. We navigated through the near whiteout, a group of small terrified children, tears in our eyes mixing with the raw wind and blowing snow. For a while we couldn't walk, the snow was so deep, so we crawled to the wheel ruts of the heavy machines. The ruts deeper than our little heads. It took 2 hours to make that normally 10-minute walk. It was harrowing. One night I had come back from swim practice at the local YMCA to my house. The door was unlocked, but my mother's car was parked in the turnout, so I knew she was home. As soon as I come in the door I yell, "I'm home." I instantly hear what sounded as like someone with boots on the upstairs level wrecking shit up to come run after me. I immediately ran outside and locked myself in my shed and called the police, telling them there was someone in my house. I waited for what felt like an eternity until the police came, thinking my parents were dead upstairs, only to hear my mother scream for me from the back porch. I immediately bust out of the shed to see about 6 policemen hopping the fence and coming into our backyard. Turns out my parents got into a big fight and started throwing clothes to pack up and leave. I look back on it now and feel like the world's biggest pussy. Maybe not totally terrifying, but I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time the other night. Basically, I woke up to see a girl with long black hair over her face, kinda like the girl in The Ring, standing next to my bed. Then she started hitting my body with a butcher's cleaver. It was weird. Every time she hit me, my body would spasm, or at least that is what it felt like. In reality I was probably lying still, but that is what it felt like. The interesting part was that I knew it wasn't real and that it was probably some weird dream, but I just couldn't snap out of it. When I finally did, it turned out that the girl that was next to my bed was just my desk chair with my black jacket over the back. So, I guess I woke up in a semi-conscious state, saw my chair and imagined it as some scary demon girl. I was alone and walking on a creek in January. I was 8 or 9. I fell through. I couldn't touch the bottom. All I could do was grab at the ice and it was wet and slippery. After the initial struggle I calmed and saw some reeds just out of arm's reach on one side. So I tried everything to get to them and eventually barely grabbed like 3 of them, pulled myself to safety and ran home before frostbite set in. Scariest moment and most exhilarating moment of my life. I went from knowing I was dead to barely being able to save myself. When I was 8, I was lying down sucking on an atomic fireball while watching Rugrats. The fireball got lodged at the top of my throat. It took a few seconds to realize I couldn't breathe. I tried to reach in my mouth to pull it out, and tried coughing it up, but nothing would work. My vision started to go black and I was lucky enough that I made enough noise for my mom to come see what was going on. She performed the Heimlich on me and saved my life. I cried for an hour straight. First time I realized that I could actually die. House burning. Among the commotion of getting family members out and calling 911, realized my dog is still in the house. Run around to the back of the house before the fire spread there. Luckily the door wasn't locked, pulled it open and she ran to the back to the sound of my voice, took a few steps into the house as the carbon monoxide was so strong, was able to scoop her up, she's a small dog, and saved her. I freaking love this pup, and if she would have died I would have been scarred for life. Even thinking about makes my heart race. Almost drowning in the Pacific. Riptide got me, so I went from water being to my knees to being unable to find the bottom or the top. Each wave pulled me under and further out. Spent over 4 of the next 5 minutes underwater. Got rescued by a 5 feet 3 inches 130-pound Japanese lifeguard. Swallowed half of the ocean before I got out. Just the awesome overwhelming force was terrifying. I'm almost 6.5 feet tall, over 200 pounds, and I had absolutely zero control of where I went or what happened to me. Probably when I was driving on the right lane of a highway, traffic stopped and a guy about 300 meters behind me just didn't stop, like no brakes. It wasn't that hard, but I remember thinking as I watched through the rear mirror and everything happened in slow motion. Brake, 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 crash. Good thing I was in a 4WD, I only got a hurt neck for a couple of weeks, and the insurance covered what little of my car was damaged, but his car got completely totaled. I spent the fall of 2008 in Greece doing a semester abroad, and the last 2 weeks we got to just take off and travel wherever we wanted. A friend and I left Athens and flew into Milan for no other reason than it was the cheapest place to fly into, and we could get a flight to Rome on the cheap, so we take the red eye to Milan, and get in around midnight. We had to catch a bus into town, which took forever. The bus dropped us off somewhere in Milan. It was after 2 a.m. so public transport was closed down. We hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of our hostel. From what I could gather, he had no idea where it was. Neither my friend nor I spoke Italian and the driver didn't speak English. He pulled out a little book and started flipping through the pages, found the street and set off. For 20 minutes. After about 15 minutes and several erroneous turns and loops, we deduced this after we passed the same hooker twice, my friend and I started bitching at the driver, but he just kept driving with the meter running. Finally, after yelling Central Station at him, he finally took us there and demanded the full fare. We tried as best we could to tell him that we wouldn't pay because he didn't take us where we wanted to go. Finally, after much interlingual arguing, we gave him half the fare and he drove off. So it's 2:30 at night and we're standing in the middle of Milan. We couldn't hail a cab because there were none. After 15 minutes, this guy pulled up in this little red clown car. He started beckoning and my friend walked over. I kept my distance. Apparently the guy knew exactly where the hostel was and offered to take us for a reasonable fare. I didn't trust the guy, but my friend pointed out he had his taxi medallion in the windshield. He climbed in the back seat of the 2-door car and I begrudgingly took the passenger seat. The dude took off, took the next right, drove 100 yards and stopped. He looked at me sternly, and said, "Get out of the car." I looked out the windshield, and 2 large, bald men were approaching. I opened the door and got out of the car. My friend climbed out of the back seat, which was quite difficult given his large build in the tiny car. I turned around and told him to grab the bags. As the 2 giant men in leather jackets approached, all I could think was, this is how I die, mugged and shanked in an alley in Milan. As the men approached, one of them reached in his pocket. I stood there, panicking inside, but trying to keep a straight face, probably failing miserably. My friend was behind me, frozen with the bags in hand. The driver walked up to the guys and they all approached us at the other side of the car. The man removed his hand from his pocket holding a flyer for the club down the street. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like 5 minutes. I was so relieved. We politely declined the invitation and briskly walked to the other side of the central station. We found another taxi and the driver took us to the hostel in about 5 minutes. Early 20s, just chilling in my room, at the front side of the house overlooking the main road. I hear a weird engine sound, not like a normal vehicle. It gets louder, and louder, and louder. It's hard to explain how loud this deep weird engine noise was. I'm pretty confused and scared, go to look out of the window and I see a tank driving past. An actual big tank, so I'm wondering if a conflict is imminent. Post to a UK forum I go on and am informed there's a company that hires out a tank for parties. Sorry a flame, but was actually pretty scary at the time. Also, I was awoken from a deep sleep by the sound of a couple hundred milk bottles simultaneously smashing because a car had crashed into a milk float outside. Plane crash, single engine plane lost power on takeoff. Not a great situation to be flying slow and close to the ground. The nose of the plane was dropped first so the plane didn't fall 1,000 feet uncontrolled into the ground. Ahead of us was a highway with power lines running next to it. To the right was a marsh. So we turned the plane to the right. Here's the scary part. Planes don't turn well when they're going slow. They drop fast. So I'm in the right seat looking at the ground coming closer and closer saying shit. I was 12, until the plane was righted and we kinda landed in a marsh. Worst that happened to me, aside from the nightmares, is the crowbar in the back came forward and met my noggin. And my shoes were ruined by marsh water. I was driving on I-90 in Mass when a board flew off a pickup truck and got lodged in my front, passenger side, window. Luckily, I was by myself. But if it had been 2 feet left, I'd be dead. This just happened a few nights ago. I was with a friend, it was late in the evening, and we decided to go for a walk/light hike at one of the parks in SF, Land's End specifically. So we're walking down this trail, it was pretty dark, and right when we reached this fork we stumble into a skunk coming from the opposite direction. All three of us were startled, but the skunk made the first move. It turned around and raised its tail. It dawned on my friend and I and we both yelled run. At the same time, my friend, female, who's 6 inches shorter than me, dusted me, wearing flats. After about 40 feet of sprinting I had to stop because I was starting to crack up. I had to walk about another block till I found her, but dude, seriously, when that skunk raised its tail that was pretty friggin' terrifying. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share and we will see you in the next video.